"Do you take this man freely and without coercion?" Bishop Henry Lawton asked. Lady Anne Crowhurst stood beneath the carved arch of the family chapel, her hand enclosed inside the gloved fingers of Marquess Percival Northam. Every pew was filled. Peers, officers, ministers, and representatives of the crown watched beneath banners bearing the joined arms of Crowhurst and Northam. Beyond the stained glass windows, bells waited to announce a union expected to reshape the politics of southern England. Anne's brother stood only a few steps away. Duke Nathaniel Crowhurst had arranged the alliance, negotiated the contracts, and promised Percival that the ceremony would proceed. His wife, Duchess Eleanor, stood on the opposite side of the chapel. She was watching Anne. Not the guests, not the bishop. Anne. Percival tightened his grip. "You will not," he whispered, without allowing his smile to change. Anne looked at him, then at Nathaniel. Her brother gave the smallest nod, urging her to continue. Minutes earlier, as he had escorted her towards the altar, he had whispered, "Say the words, and everything will be safe." Anne had asked. For whom? He had not answered. Now the chapel waited. Bishop Henry repeated the question. "Lady Anne, do you take this man freely and without coercion?" Anne pulled her hand from Percival's grasp. "No." A breath of disbelief moved through the chapel. Nathaniel stepped forward. "Anne is distressed. The ceremony will pause." She turned towards him. "I am not distressed." Percival reached for her wrist. Anne moved back. "I do not consent to this marriage." The bishop closed the marriage book. "There can be no continuation." Percival's composure broke. "Control your sister." Anne stared at Nathaniel. "Is that what you promised him?" 6 months earlier, Nathaniel had believed the Northam alliance would save Crowhurst. The family controlled 2 northern ports that had supported the estate for generations. Warehouses, shipyards, rope makers, and customs offices depended upon them. A new parliamentary bill threatened to transfer management of both ports to a commercial authority backed by rival families. If the measure passed, Crowhurst would lose port income, control over employment contracts, several major shipping agreements, funding for the infirmary, the revenue supporting hundreds of tenant families. Nathaniel had spent months seeking allies. Most offered sympathy. Percival Northam offered votes. The Marquess controlled a bloc in the Lords large enough to defeat the bill. He also possessed banking connections that could extend Crowhurst's commercial credit. His condition was not spoken as a demand. It was presented as an opportunity. A marriage between Percival and Lady Anne would unite their interests permanently. Nathaniel considered the proposal ideal. Percival was wealthy, titled and outwardly disciplined. He maintained Northam Hall with precision. His estates produced strong revenues. No public scandal had ever touched his name. Anne was 26, accomplished and unmarried. She taught music at the village school, managed a small widow's fund, and had resisted several previous proposals without causing difficulty. When Nathaniel introduced the match, she did not refuse. Percival was attentive during courtship. He listened when Anne spoke about education. He promised that Northam Hall could support her charitable work. He praised her independence. Nathaniel regarded her willingness to consider the proposal as consent already given. He never imagined that consent might later be withdrawn. Duchess Eleanor was more cautious. Her own marriage to Nathaniel had begun as an arrangement between families. Before accepting, she had spent 3 private afternoons speaking with him without parents or solicitors present. On the final afternoon, Nathaniel had asked her, "Do you choose this, or have they merely taught you not to refuse? The question had made her trust him. 14 years later, she watched him forget why it had mattered. Percival's behavior changed after the engagement was announced. First, he objected to Anne continuing her work at the village school. A future marchioness cannot spend her mornings teaching scales to labourers' children. Anne answered lightly. The children do not play differently because their fathers labour. Percival did not smile. Then he replaced 2 servants selected to accompany her to Northam. He said they were too loyal to Crowhurst and might divide her household. He requested that letters addressed to Anne be delivered through his secretary. He informed her that her widow's fund would be transferred to Northam's central charitable office. When Anne objected, he replied, "A wife's independence is useful during courtship and disruptive during marriage." Eleanor heard about the comment from Anne's maid. Nathaniel dismissed it. Percival is establishing expectations. He is establishing obedience. Every household requires order. Order agreed upon by whom? Nathaniel continued reading the port correspondence. You are determined to interpret discipline as cruelty, and you are determined to call every warning an inconvenience. The strongest warning came from Ada Mercer. Ada was 52 and had served inside Northam Hall for 17 years, first as a senior maid and later as housekeeper. She arrived at Crowhurst carrying no stolen letters and no dramatic confession. She requested a private meeting. Nathaniel allowed her 10 minutes. Ada stood before him in a plain brown dress, her hands roughened by years of work. I am here because Lady Anne does not know the house she is entering. Nathaniel remained behind his desk. You were dismissed from Northam. I resigned. After a disagreement concerning household discipline, after Lord Northam ordered me to prevent a woman from sending a letter to her sister. Nathaniel's expression did not change. Ada described what she had witnessed. Percival controlled correspondence. He removed servants who passed messages without permission. He punished whole families when one member resisted him. A female cousin who refused a marriage arrangement had been confined to an isolated wing and declared emotionally unstable by a doctor dependent upon Northam patronage. Another woman had been denied money until she surrendered control of her personal accounts. Guests never saw these things. They saw polished silver, quiet servants, and orderly dinners. A servant sees what a guest is never invited to witness, Ada said. Nathaniel regarded her with growing irritation. You carried trays through Northam Hall. You did not understand the discipline required to govern it. Ada met his eyes. No, Your Grace. I carried the keys. Eleanor asked Nathaniel to investigate. He refused. A dismissed servant accusing a marquess is not evidence. She named witnesses, more servants, people who lived inside the household, people dependent upon wages and capable of resentment. Percival also depends upon something. What? Your need for his votes. Nathaniel stood. You think I would endanger Anne for Parliament. I think you have already decided that danger is acceptable if it cannot be formally proved. He turned away. The alliance protects thousands of people, and Anne is one person. Government requires sacrifice. Eleanor's voice sharpened. A brother should not call his sister's captivity public service. Ada continued speaking with Anne. When Nathaniel learned of it, he did not question Percival. He punished Ada. Her son lost his employment at the port. Her daughter's license to sell cloth in the Crowhurst market was withdrawn. The family cottage was reclaimed by the estate. Ada was barred from the main house. Eleanor placed the notices on Nathaniel's desk. If her claims are false, why must her children be punished? A household cannot employ those assisting an attack against it. You have answered her accusation better than she ever could." Nathaniel's face hardened. "You are comparing me to Northam. I am watching you use housing and employment to silence a woman who displeased you. That is not the same. Only because you are the man doing it." Anne's fear became impossible to ignore during the formal engagement dinner. A young maid spilled wine over Percival's glove. The girl immediately apologized. Percival did not raise his voice. He calmly instructed the steward to dismiss her, deduct the cost of his glove from her unpaid wages, and notify every Northam household that neither she nor her relatives were to be employed. Anne intervened. "It was an accident. A servant who cannot control a glass cannot be trusted with greater duties. She has worked here for 3 years. Then she had 3 years to learn." Anne looked towards Nathaniel. Her brother said nothing. Percival turned to her. "A wife who interferes with discipline teaches servants to divide the household." The room continued eating. The maid remained standing near the door, weeping silently. Eleanor saw Anne look at the girl, not with sympathy alone, with recognition. That night, Anne entered Eleanor's room without sending a servant ahead. She had removed her jewelry, but was still wearing her dinner gown. "Percival has chosen the people who will attend me after the wedding." Eleanor set aside her book. "Without asking you. He says my present servants belong to Crowhurst. What else?" Anne sat. "All letters will go through his secretary. My allowance will be administered by his steward. I am not to travel to London unless he approves." Eleanor waited. Anne's hands tightened. "He said that if I become unreasonable, his physician may recommend rest away from society." "Did he explain what unreasonable means?" "Refusing him." Eleanor moved closer. "Do you wish to marry him?" Anne looked down. "I wish I had never promised to." "That is not the same question." Anne's composure collapsed. "No." Eleanor went to Nathaniel before dawn. He was already in his study, reading a message from Northam's parliamentary agents. "Anne does not consent. She is frightened." She said no. She agreed to the engagement. Before Percival began controlling her letters and threatening isolation, Nathaniel placed the message down. "The wedding is 3 weeks away. The Crown's representative has accepted. The port vote follows immediately afterwards. Then postpone it. Percival will withdraw his support. Then find another solution." "There is no other solution." Eleanor stared at him. "You have begun describing your sister's life as the only available currency. I am protecting thousands of families, at the cost of one woman who trusted you to protect her. Anne is not being sold. She is marrying a marquess. A title does not make coercion generous." Nathaniel's voice rose. "Marriage is not abandoned because a bride feels uncertain." Eleanor stepped nearer. "What level of fear would you consider sufficient?" He did not answer. Nathaniel spoke with Anne privately later that day. He expected to find her confused by Eleanor and Ada. Instead, she sat upright beside the window, composed but pale. "Have they frightened you?" he asked. "They asked what I wanted." "That was not my question. It is the question you avoid." Nathaniel tried to explain the port crisis. He described dock workers, merchants, and families whose livelihoods depended upon the alliance. Anne listened. When he finished, she asked, "Would you have married Eleanor if she had told you she was afraid?" "That is different." "Why?" "Our marriage was not tied to the survival of 2 ports." Anne looked at him. "Would you have called her fear childish if her marriage protected your career?" Nathaniel stood. "You forget yourself." "No, I am trying not to." You carry the Crowhurst name. Then do not use it to silence me." Nathaniel ordered the wedding to continue. Anne's servants were replaced. Her journeys were supervised. Ada was forbidden from contacting her. Eleanor was excluded from further negotiations. Nathaniel told himself Anne would regain composure once the ceremony began. The chapel, the bishop, the crown, and the assembled families would remind her of her duty. He no longer expected genuine agreement. He depended upon her inability to refuse publicly. Eleanor understood this. She went privately to Bishop Henry Lawton. "Does the church require the bride's consent? Without it, there is no marriage, even when families, titles, and the crown expect otherwise." Especially then. Eleanor then contacted Ada and the former Northam servants she had interviewed. They would attend the wedding, not to interrupt it, to speak only if Anne asked why her refusal mattered. On the morning of the ceremony, Nathaniel escorted his sister through the palace corridor. Anne's ivory gown had been selected by Northam. Her familiar maid was gone. Percival's housekeeper waited near the carriage. Nathaniel offered his arm. Anne accepted it because hundreds of guests were watching. At the chapel doors, he whispered, "Say the words, and everything will be safe." Anne looked at him. For whom? The doors opened before he answered. Percival stood before the altar in silver and black. The royal representative sat in the first pew. Eleanor stood beside the Crowhurst family, her expression unreadable. Nathaniel placed Anne's hand into Percival's. For a moment, the Marquess smiled. Then he leaned closer. "Once this is completed, your brother's interference will end. My brother arranged the marriage. He will no longer decide how my wife behaves. And if I refuse?" Percival's fingers tightened. "You will not." Bishop Henry began the vows. Percival answered clearly, "I do." Then the bishop turned towards Anne. "Do you take this man freely and without coercion?" Anne withdrew her hand. "No." Nathaniel moved immediately. "She is overwhelmed." "I am not." "The ceremony will pause." Anne faced the congregation. "I do not consent to this marriage." Percival seized her wrist. "You gave your word." Eleanor stepped between them. "Release her." Nathaniel addressed the bishop. "Give her time to recover." Bishop Henry closed the marriage book. "There can be no continuation. The bride has refused." Percival turned on Nathaniel. "Control your sister." Anne looked at her brother. "Is that what you promised him?" Before Nathaniel could answer, the chapel doors opened. Ada Mercer entered. Behind her stood former servants of Northam Hall. Percival's face changed. "Remove those servants." The royal representative rose. "No one will be removed until we understand why the Duke attempted to proceed after the bride withdrew consent." Eleanor placed a packet of statements before the bishop. "These are warnings His Grace received before today." Ada looked directly at Nathaniel. He knew what kind of household awaited her. Every guest turned towards the Duke. Nathaniel had believed the altar would make Anne's refusal impossible. Instead, it had placed his choices before the crown. The wedding had ended. The inquiry into what he had known was only beginning. The chapel doors were closed before the bells could ring. Guests remained in their pews while Bishop Henry led Anne into the vestry. Eleanor followed her. Ada and the former Northam servants were kept inside the chapel under the protection of the royal representative. Nathaniel stood alone before the altar. Percival approached him with controlled fury. "You assured me she would comply." Nathaniel lowered his voice. "I assured you the marriage would proceed because I believed Anne would honor her commitment." She has publicly insulted my house. She withdrew consent after your wife filled her head with the complaints of servants. Nathaniel looked towards Ada. For months he had described her testimony as resentment. Now Percival's first response to rejection was not sorrow or confusion. It was a demand that the people who had warned Anne be removed. Percival continued, "You will announce that your sister suffered a nervous episode. The ceremony may be completed privately after she has been examined." Nathaniel stared at him. "Examined by whom?" "My physician." The answer was immediate, too immediate. Nathaniel remembered Anne's warning. If she resisted, Percival would have her declared unfit. "I will not place my sister under your physician's authority." Percival's expression hardened. "You have already placed her under mine." No marriage occurred. The contracts are signed. The contracts do not create a wife. Percival stepped closer. "You need my votes." Nathaniel did. The Port Bill was scheduled for debate within days. Without Northam's support, the Crowhurst coalition might collapse. Percival knew it. "You will correct this," he said, "or the ports fall." Nathaniel looked at the altar where he had nearly exchanged his sister's freedom for political protection. For the first time, he understood that Percival had never viewed the alliance as mutual. He had viewed it as ownership purchased through desperation. Inside the vestry, Anne sat beside the cold fireplace. Her wedding veil had been removed. The marks of Percival's fingers remained visible around her wrist. Eleanor knelt before her. "You answered freely." Anne stared at the closed door. "Nathaniel will lose the ports. That consequence belongs to the men who made your marriage a condition. He will blame me." "He may." Anne looked at her. "You are not promising he will understand?" "No." The honesty steadied her more than reassurance would have. Bishop Henry entered. "The royal representative has ordered a formal statement from everyone involved." Anne's face tightened. "Must I speak before the guests?" "No, but you must state clearly whether your refusal was voluntary." "It was." "Were you threatened?" Anne looked at the bruising on her wrist. "Before today, and during it." Eleanor reached for her hand. Anne did not hide the marks. The first inquiry took place that afternoon in the Crowhurst Council chamber. Sir Jonathan Merivale, the Crown's representative, presided. Nathaniel sat at one end of the table. Percival sat at the other. Anne entered in a plain travelling dress rather than her wedding gown. She chose a chair beside Eleanor. Ada sat with the former Northam servants. Sir Jonathan began with Anne. "Did anyone compel you to refuse the marriage?" "No." "Did anyone instruct you to embarrass Lord Northam?" "No." "Why did you withdraw consent?" Anne answered, without looking towards Percival. "Because he intended to control my correspondence, money, movements, and companions. He told me resistance would be treated as instability." Percival interrupted. "A husband is entitled to establish order in his own household." Sir Jonathan turned towards him. "You will answer when questioned." Anne continued. "He said his physician could recommend my isolation if I became unreasonable." "What did he define as unreasonable?" "Disobedience." Sir Jonathan looked towards Nathaniel. "Did your sister report these concerns to you?" Nathaniel's answer came slowly. "Yes." "Did you investigate them?" "No." "Why?" "I believed they reflected anxiety before marriage." "Were you informed of similar conduct inside Northam Hall?" Nathaniel glanced at Ada. "Yes." "And did you investigate those allegations?" "No." Sir Jonathan's expression remained still. Why? Nathaniel had once possessed several prepared answers. The witnesses lacked rank. The records were informal. The alliance served the public interest. None sounded defensible in that room. because Lord Northam's support was necessary to protect the Crowhurst ports. Anne closed her eyes. She had known. Hearing him admit it still hurt. Ada testified next. She described Percival's methods without embellishment. Letters intercepted, doors locked, allowances withheld, servants dismissed for carrying messages, a cousin confined after refusing an arrangement, a doctor encouraged to describe resistance as hysteria. Percival's barrister challenged her. "You left Northam's service under hostile circumstances. I left because I would not lock a woman away from her family. You possess no medical training. I did not diagnose her. I watched a healthy woman become ill after months of confinement. You are a servant, interpreting decisions beyond your understanding." Ada looked towards Nathaniel before answering. "I was told the same thing by His Grace." The room grew quiet. Nathaniel felt the accusation differently now. Ada was not claiming that service made her infallible. She was claiming that rank had made him unwilling to look. The former Northam physician was called 2 days later. Dr. Elias Benton had refused Percival's request to declare his cousin mentally incompetent. He testified that the woman had been distressed but rational. What reason did Lord Northam give for seeking confinement? Sir Jonathan asked. She had attempted to leave the estate against his wishes. Was that evidence of illness? No. Did Lord Northam ask you to describe it as such? Yes. Percival stood. This inquiry has become an attack upon private household authority. Sir Jonathan replied. No, my lord. It is an inquiry into whether private authority was used to remove another person's legal and physical freedom. Percival's reputation began to collapse before the report was even completed. The Crown withdrew his honorary appointment. Charitable boards removed his name. Several families cancelled negotiations involving their daughters. Robert Northam's political allies did not abandon him because they had suddenly become champions of women's independence. They abandoned him because public association had become dangerous. Nathaniel saw how quickly influence disappeared once silence no longer protected it. The port vote arrived exactly as Percival had threatened. Northam's bloc supported the transfer bill. Crowhurst lost its majority. For several hours, it appeared that both ports would pass into rival control. Nathaniel's advisers urged him to approach Percival privately. An apology may restore the agreement. What would he require? No one answered. They all knew. Anne's compliance. A public statement questioning Ada. Perhaps even a renewed engagement once the scandal quieted. Nathaniel dismissed the advisers. He would not purchase the votes again. But rejecting Percival did not solve the crisis. For the first time, Nathaniel had to protect Crowhurst without using his sister as political security. He sold the family's southern hunting grounds. He suspended renovations at the palace. He surrendered personal control of the port revenues to a board representing merchants, dock workers, and local councils. The new structure persuaded several undecided peers that the ports should remain locally managed without exclusive ducal authority. Eleanor negotiated with shipping families Nathaniel had once considered beneath direct consultation. Anne met representatives of the Workers' Widows' Fund. The revised proposal passed by 3 votes. Crowhurst kept the ports. Nathaniel lost much of the authority he had tried to preserve. The workers gained more control than before. He could no longer claim that Anne's marriage had been the only solution. It had merely been the solution that required him to sacrifice the least of himself. Ada's family received formal restitution. Her son returned to work with back pay. Her daughter's market license was restored. The eviction order was cancelled. Nathaniel visited their cottage personally. Ada received him at the door, but did not invite him inside. "I called you a liar," he said. "You did. I punished your family because you contradicted me." "Yes, I told myself I was protecting Crowhurst. You were protecting a decision." Nathaniel accepted the distinction. "I have restored what I took. You restored wages, a license, and a house. What remains? The knowledge that you could remove them whenever my words became inconvenient." Nathaniel had prepared to offer her a senior position inside the household. He understood before speaking that it would be the wrong response. What would prevent that fear? Independent housing agreements, a grievance office outside ducal control, protection for servants who testify, no dismissal of a family member because another member speaks. Nathaniel nodded. "It will be done." Ada studied him. "You do not need a loyal servant beside you, Your Grace. You need servants who may tell you the truth and still sleep beneath their own roofs." Anne petitioned to end Nathaniel's financial guardianship over her remaining settlement. He opposed it instinctively. Then he stopped himself. For years, her income had passed through the Crowhurst office because it was considered proper protection for an unmarried woman. Now that same structure gave the brother who had tried to compel her marriage continued power over her life. Nathaniel signed the release. Anne received independent control of her residence, accounts, and charitable work. She did not thank him. He had not given her freedom. He had stopped withholding it. Eleanor moved to the dower house. Nathaniel asked her to remain at the palace. She refused. "You helped Anne escape the marriage," he said. "Must ours also be punished?" "This is not punishment." "Then what is it?" "Distance from a man who once asked whether I freely chose him, then decided his sister's choice could be overruled. I was wrong." "Yes, I admitted it. Admission prevents denial. It does not rebuild trust." Nathaniel looked towards the packed cases beside her. "I never intended to harm Anne. You intended her fear not to delay you." The words echoed Eleanor's earlier warning. He had reduced his sister's terror to an administrative obstacle. Eleanor continued, "You will know whether you have changed when another person's refusal costs you something you deeply want." Percival attempted to salvage his standing by claiming Anne had been manipulated. He circulated statements describing her as fragile, impressionable, and overwhelmed by female advisers. Anne answered publicly, not through Nathaniel, not through Eleanor, in her own name. "I did not refuse because I was incapable of understanding marriage. I refused because I understood the marriage being offered." She described no intimate detail beyond what was necessary. She did not exaggerate Percival's conduct. She simply stated that consent could be withdrawn. The statement spread through London. Some newspapers mocked her, others praised her. More importantly, several engaged women requested private meetings with bishops, solicitors, or female relatives before their ceremonies. Bishop Henry issued new guidance for weddings conducted in his diocese. The bride and groom would each be interviewed separately before vows. A refusal would not be treated as illness, embarrassment, or family disobedience. It would be treated as an answer. 2 years passed. Anne did not marry. She opened a music school and established a fund helping servants secure employment after retaliatory dismissal. Ada joined its oversight board, not as an honored symbol but as a working member with authority. The Crowhurst ports remained open under independent management. Nathaniel's political career recovered only partially. He never received the royal council position Percival's alliance had promised. He stopped describing that loss as the price of Anne's refusal. It was the price of his own choice. At a later family engagement, Nathaniel was asked to approve a match between a young cousin and the heir to a neighboring earldom. The families had nearly completed negotiations. Before any announcement, Nathaniel requested to speak with the young woman alone. Her father objected. Nathaniel insisted. When the room cleared, he asked, "Do you choose this marriage?" The girl hesitated. "I believe it is expected." "That was not my question." She looked towards the door. "I need more time." Nathaniel closed the contract folder. "Then no announcement will be made." Her father entered moments later, furious. Nathaniel accepted the anger. The estates lost a valuable agreement. He did not reverse the decision. Eleanor had been standing in the corridor. After the family departed, Nathaniel found her in the garden. "You heard?" "Yes. I once believed duty meant Anne should endure what benefited Crowhurst." Eleanor looked towards him. "Duty begins with what we owe another person. It does not begin with what we may take from them." Nathaniel nodded. "I understand that now. You understood it when we married. I found it easier to respect choice when the answer benefited me. That honesty mattered more than a polished apology." He held out his hand. Eleanor did not immediately take it. Then she did. They walked through the garden together. She did not return to the palace that night. Trust had not become whole because Nathaniel performed one better act. But he had finally accepted a refusal that cost him something. Crowhurst survived without trading Anne's future for votes. Anne built a life that required no husband to validate it. Ada kept her home without owing silence to the Duke. Percival retained his title, but lost the protection that had allowed discipline to disguise control. Nathaniel lost political advancement, authority over the ports, and the certainty that his intentions made his decisions honorable. What he gained was smaller and more difficult: the ability to hear no without treating it as rebellion. He had once believed rank determined whose warning deserved examination. He had trusted the polished conduct of a marquess over the testimony of women who had lived behind his doors. In the end, the servant understood Northam Hall more clearly than the Duke who negotiated with its master. And the wedding altar did not destroy Crowhurst. It exposed the truth required to save it. No title, contract, family obligation, or public benefit could speak consent on behalf of another person. Before the crown, before the church, and before her brother, Anne had answered for herself. No. The word ended a wedding. It also ended the belief that her life belonged to those who claimed to be protecting it.